I was very pleased when I arrived here this morning to find a little pamphlet which summarizes my talk. Did you know that 90% of cancers are caused by the environment? So if anybody is in haste, they can take the little pamphlet and, and skip my talk. But while it is generally accepted that there's something in our urban congested living that causes a higher incidence of certain diseases, the exact mechanisms of those causes are not well known. Established correlations, as our previous speaker mentioned, is not the same as establishing causes, and without establishing causes, one is really at a loss at what to do. The brief I've been given today is to look at the role of fires in the home, smoke in the home, as a possible causative agent, contributory factor to cancer, but I'm going to take the liberty of taking it slightly broader because cancer is not the only health outcome of the inhalation of particles generated in and around the home. So this is going to be a tale of domestic smoke, and one all too familiar to us in South Africa, where a large fraction of the population is still dependent on either coal or wood for domestic energy needs. Now, if you're a Boy Scout or Girl Guide and in the middle of the veld making a little wood fire, we wouldn't regard that as pollution. You put 100,000 wood fires together and you get a different type of situation. I often tease my students when I'm lecturing on air pollution to ask them what are the first 5 highest priority air quality issues in South Africa, and by and large they come up with the right answer. But my list, you see I've highlighted domestic coal smoke, is actually priority item number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And for number 8, you can take your pick from the other issues. In terms of the public health impact, the number of people exposed to the highest concentrations of pollution, this coal smoke, domestic coal smoke, is certainly the highest. If it was to be introduced as a product today, certainly cancer would be in the front of the queue to have it regulated and banned. Forgive me if those of you have seen this type of comparison before, but I always like to show this, if only to illustrate that my talk is about very little at all. When we're talking about particles in the atmosphere, we are talking about the inhaled particles, and then we codename small particles PM10, particles with a diameter less than 10 microns, compared to a human hair on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side for you, and superimposed then a little PM2.5 particle, which is even smaller, and the significances of these two diameters you'll see soon enough. And then on the second slide, the ultrafine particles less than 0.1 micron, it's 100 nanometers, which is now a new classification of particles known as nanoparticles. So just bear in mind that scale, that when we're talking about amount of material, it is extremely small amounts. If we translate this onto a size graph, we've got on the horizontal axis the particle diameter in microns as on a logarithmic scale, and on the y-axis a mass scale. And this is a typical mass size distribution in the atmosphere. And you'll see that there are 3 modes or humps. On the green and the red are what we term coarse particles, generally mineral-type particles produced by mechanical processes, wind-blown dust, vehicles traveling on roads, material handling, loading, offloading, grinding. And you'll see that those particles taper out at about 1 micron. On the other end of the scale, starting at about 1 nanometer, you get what are called the nucleation mode particles. These are particles that condense from the gas phase, very much like steam from a kettle, comes out as a vapor, condenses into little droplets that you can see. The droplets start out in a few nanometers diameter, still behaving very much like gases. They speedy, they collide, they merge until they reach the accumulation mode in the middle, where they become slower and don't grow any further. So that middle mode, accumulation mode, is where particles become very persistent. They last for days in the atmosphere, and I won't go through the exercise now, but if I ask the students, how fast does the wind blow? They look, well, how fast does the wind blow? Well, fast enough to blow at just 20 kilometers per hour to get from here to Durban in a day. Okay, so they can go very far, and using satellite imagery, we've in fact traced particles from wildfires in Africa all the way to Australia and measured the chemical composition to confirm those particles. So they really do persist a long time. Whereas these very big particles, you'll see what we call fallout dust, is a very rapid fallout, so that if they go up into the air, unless the wind's blowing hard, they will settle out rather rapidly. So mine dump dust will settle in a range of just 1 to 2 kilometers around the mine dump. So you can see the size of the particles is related to their persistence in the atmosphere, and in a moment we'll see how that relates to inhalation. These processes of sedimentation, which I've just demonstrated to you, the process of impaction, particle coming along, it can, if a small particle, it can go around an obstruction with the wind. If it's a heavy particle, it's got momentum and it will bump into any solid, including in the respiratory tract. If you've got the bifurcations in the trachea and the bronchi, wherever you have a fork and the air has to divide, the particles can touch on that surface because they don't quite follow the air streams. Very smallest particles, around 100 nanometers, 0.1 micron, are small enough to diffuse, but they have to be brought to a surface. They get close enough to a surface, they can diffuse, touch the surface, but equally well, they don't have to diffuse in any particular direction. Static electrical forces are also at play, which I'll put it there for completeness, but not a major factor. So if we look at how these particles are going to behave once they reach the face and are inhaled, we need to look at what exactly happens in this process, where in the system they get deposited, and by what mechanism. So these larger particles are deposited in the nasal region, and that's part is shown here. Okay, so particles on the range 10 to 30 microns can actually get trapped in the nose, in the hairs in the nasal cavity and the distortions, and get either blown out or swallowed with the mucus. Particles from 3 to 5 microns get into the top of the pharynx and the trachea. But when you get down to 1 to 2 microns, the particles are getting down to the alveolar region, and particles from 0.3 or 0.1 to 0.3 microns actually finally reach the alveoli. On the x-axis here, we have the number of bifurcations in the lungs. It goes up to 21 or 22 times that the lungs, that the airways split up. And you'll see here that 10 micron, 7 micron particles tend to get caught, trapped by impaction in the upper part of the airways, whereas particles of 3, 2, and 1 microns, a little bit of them get trapped at the upper levels, but a large number penetrate into the deep lung and can, if they get that far, if they are deposited, they deposit by diffusion. But here's the anomaly. If they can get in, they can equally well get out. So if there are any of you who are smokers here, this is how we know. Because if you go out and smoke and come back and then breathe, we can tell for the next 10 or 15 breaths that you've been smoking, because the particles go in there. They don't necessarily go in once and get trapped. They can similarly be lurking around there and be exhaled on the breath for the next 15 breaths until they dilute enough to come out. So if you do go out and smoke and don't want people to know, you've got to hyperventilate.